Hello there everybody and welcome to this channel. My name is Savvy from SAanatomy.com, and for today's video we're going to be working on a pig. The difference is we're going to be working in Blender instead of ZBrush, but everything else is just the same. So let's get started. Now the rules and the principles stay the same whether you're in Blender or ZBrush and Maya if you're using Maya. We're going to start off from basic shapes. So in Blender, we're going to model out the pig, and we're going to move on to sculpting, remeshing it first and then sculpting and then going into the finer details. Just the same as we would do in ZBrush, where we're starting off from basic subtools or basic shapes and then dynameshing them together and then sculpting over them and then moving on to finer details right at the end. Now over here, when you're modeling your animal, it's good to have a low poly count. The topology doesn't really matter because you're just going to remesh the entire model afterwards, and it's going to change its topology entirely. So Blender will try to make everything quads. Then you can later on sculpt over that. But what I like to do is just have a low poly count and then add in a multi-resolution. And then we just keep on going up in subdivision levels, just as we would in ZBrush. So think of the multi-resolution modifier as the divide modifier in ZBrush. It works quite the same. So starting off with the sculpt, as you see here, we're just going to smooth things out. The reason why we're smoothing things out is obviously because you can see the sharp edges that Blender has created for us. This is from the low poly going into the higher resolution. Blender can't automatically smooth things out for us. That's for us to do. Well, I suppose it can, but there are some limitations. So what I like to do with the animal, whatever animal that I'm working on, sometimes I like to sculpt out the actual animal, what it would look like if you had to see it in a form or whatever. But we're not going to go into major details such as like skin, pores and all that. We're just using this as our starting point, our base mesh. So instead of just starting off right off the bat making the anatomy of the animal, we're going to start off by sculpting the normal looking animal and then breaking it down to its muscles and then its anatomy. The reason why I'm doing this is because it's much easier to break it down if you had like a full body first rather than piecing everything together as you go. So it's much easier to do that. So now you can see we're starting to break apart the mesh. Well, not necessarily break, but we're starting to go into the anatomy details like the muscles and all that, and it's a lot easier to do that if you had an entire animal to work on rather than just starting from really simple stuff like simple shapes and then trying to merge it all together, because it helps you envision how the muscle is supposed to look on the already complete animal. So it's much easier to do that. It's just a little trick that I use from time to time. So as you can see here, we've just made a lot of things simpler. We've skipped over a fine degree of detail we had to focus on right at the beginning. Instead, now we just move straight into sculpting and sculpted things a lot easier. You can see that having a actual complete animal at first is much easier to work on than having absolutely nothing to start from. So now you can see, for example, with the face or the body itself, it's much easier to sculpt on the face because it's already complete. Now we can just come in and with our crease brush and sculpt in the details for the zygomaticus, for example, or the temporalis, and it's much easier to sculpt that way. Interesting thing I did discover when working with the pig, it's actually one of the easiest animals I've worked on so far. This because of many reasons, but one of the ones that I found really interesting is because it's really scrawny. It's actually pretty small. Its arms are squashed together compared to like other animals, because the major details and the major information are still there. You still have the same muscles you would find in a lion or any other creature, but a pig is much easier because they're much more squashed down. It's really short, so you could just come in with like your big brush and just sculpt over these muscles, and it's really easy to work that way. I've found the pig and the goat, they're very similar, because they're just really small. So it's what I've discovered is it's a little more difficult if you're working on a animal with really long limbs, because you're trying to get all that detail in, but the mesh kind of restricts you from doing that because it's so stretched. You have to have a lot of polygons in a lot of regions. For example, the ostrich, it's right around its joints. You kind of have to have like a lot of topology over there, or a lot of poly right around that area. So the pig is really simple to work on because quite literally it's just small. It's much nicer for now. That's not saying that all mesh or all models that you'll be working on that are small are going to be really easy. I'm just saying that the pig is easy because of the way its mesh is shaped out, the way its body is. It really helps with the topology. With, for example, if you were to do a bird has its own level of difficulty and all that. But if you're working on mammals or creatures that are very similar and whatnot, it's much easier to work on smaller animals like the goat and the pig, or a bunny or something like that, because all their muscles are really squashed in together. So you just have to like get the major details and all that and then move on. So basically it's a way of cheating without really cheating, I guess, if you could say that. For the others, I really should have just used an inflate brush instead of just using the clay standard brush, but I should have used the inflate or even the standard brush to just move out the all the different udders and all that. But instead I just used the clay. But if you want to make it easy for yourself, you can either make it a different mesh and then remesh it together, or just merge everything together but at a later stage. So you can either do that, or you can also use the inflate brush, mask out the different parts that you want to protrude out, and then just use the inflate or the standard. But I learned from my mistake after I finished this, and I thought to myself, oh, I probably should have just used the inflate brush. But yeah, you can do it with any other brush. Well, given that if it's the standard or the clay or the inflate or even move, you can do with that. But other brushes such as the flatten, obviously you can't use that. But yes, if you want to make it easy for yourself, all those spherical shapes, you either make it a different mesh, you use a sphere, and then you just remesh it into the model itself. Now with the leg or the arm, you would see me do the same thing that I would in other animals, as this goes all across the board for the body as well. You just block out all the things you know you would be able to see from afar, all your major muscle groups, such as the biceps femoris, or if you're looking at the arm, you would see the deltoids, the triceps, or if you're looking at the body, you'll be able to spot the abdominal obliques or the trapezius. So for the leg, I just sculpted in the biceps femoris and the semitendinosus as well, and then moved on to other parts. So just remember, whatever you know you could see from afar, you want to focus on those parts. And if you want to take it a step further, you could also black out your entire mesh and then try to see it as a silhouette and spot out all the major groups that you think you need to touch up on. Now, remember when I said that small animals or small models will be easier to work on? I forgot to mention that it's easier to work on if you're working on large scale parts of the mesh, such as the major forms of the entire model. If you're going into really small details, it's easy to do it if you're at a higher subdivision level. And now in a smaller subdivision level, it's going to be a little tricky because the mesh just doesn't really allow you to do that. For example, you're going to find it tricky to sculpt in the extensors. For those kind of details, usually you just want to go up to a higher subdivision. So here in Blender, you could just, in your multi-resolution modifier, you can just click on subdivide and then go into your third subdivision level. But honestly, 1 and 2 can already do the job. 1 just sculpts out everything properly, and then 2 just gets into finer details, and 3 is just for the really small nitty-gritty details that you want to obtain, such as all the extensors, the long digital extensor and all that, and the short digital extensors, or even veins if you wanted to go crazy with those kind of details. But I believe you could also do veins in your second subdivision level as well. Just make sure that you keep in mind that the higher you go, the slower Blender will run, depending on your device, obviously. But normally, if you have a standard machine, then it'll probably run slow. It'll lag from time to time. Now we're entering just the extra refinement, which is gonna come in with details that we probably forgot to put in before, like the lines on your normal muscles and whatever. What people tend to do is use their crease brush, or in ZBrush they would use the damp standard. So you'll just go in and just draw all the lines in. What I generally like to do is use clay buildup in ZBrush and the clay brush in Blender. This is mainly because your clay brush, there's a lot of control you can have with just like this big box looking alpha. You can sculpt in so much details, and I tend to draw in the lines whilst I'm using the clay brush, so it deforms the part of the mesh and it also draws in the lines that I want in the later future, and then you can use that, and you can also use the crease as well, so you don't necessarily just have to use the clay brush alone. But that's what I tend to do. I really love the clay brush and it's really helpful. But for circular things or like circular forms, you either use the standard or your inflate or all other brushes. Clay is just for your really rough looking details.